Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about a dad I saw in Costco, how he tried to help his son regulate his feelings, and what that has to do with how we talk to ourselves. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. I'd love to talk to you today. I want to kind of start this off with a story about a parent, about something that my wife and I observed while we were grocery shopping. And then we're going to move from that, though, and we're going to talk about what does that mean for how we talk to ourselves. So my wife and I are shopping. We went to the grocery store. We actually went to Costco. I am that husband. I take my wife out to, very exclusive clubs. And while we were there was a dad who was just probably one of the most patient men I've ever seen. But one of the things that he was doing, I wanted to be like, bro, I could help you. Now, it would be rude, and I didn't do it in a public setting like that because you can't do that. But so he had two boys in the grocery cart, and then he was carrying another child, I think a girl. And one of the boys was very upset. And, these kids are under 5. They're crying. The one's crying. He's very upset. He wanted something that dad had said no. So kudos to dad for that. But as the kid is crying, dad keeps saying to him, buddy, it's okay. I know that it's hard to see something that you want and can't get. And immediately when he would do that, the kid would start wailing, Remy wants it. And, then the kid would scream for a little bit and then he'd slow down. And then the dad would say again, well, buddy, it's okay. I know wanting something and not being able to get it is really hard. And the kid would scream again. Now, here's the thing. This is gentle parenting gone wrong. Good intentions, but you're literally reinforcing to your child that screaming is getting him some level of attention. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not even saying that the kid's a bad kid. This is just how their brains work. They're very concrete at this age. They're very, very much A to B. And the kid can't think abstractly, and dad's talking to him abstractly. And I want to be really clear. I know that people are like, oh my goodness, you're judging the dad. No, I'm not. I'm just saying what he was doing was actually creating more of what he was trying to stop. To me, it's really simple. If what you're doing isn't getting you what you want, you need to decide, have I just not failed enough, or do I need to fail more, right? Or could I just stop what I'm doing? And I think he should have just stopped what he was doing, because if he had just said it one time, hey, you know what, buddy? I know it's hard that you can't get something that you want, but that's the way it is. And then we're done. Let the kid cry. As long as he's not hitting anybody, we just move on with what we're doing. And so that actually brings me to the next part, because then a few aisles over, the kid's hitting dad. Because now here's the thing. We're going on 10 minutes of this, where almost every time that it would die down, dad would try to comfort the kid would scream. All right. The problem with that always is, as that happens, what's going on? The kid's like, oh, it's going to end. It's going to end. Nope, dad said something nice. Now he's escalating and he's hitting dad. And this is one of the times my wife said to me, that's where I would have walked out. I would have just said, okay, look, if you can't stop hitting dad or mom, because she would have been mom, we're walking out. And you set a boundary. And one time you do that, and you probably don't ever have to do it with your kids again. Probably. There would be some kids that are going to need 3 or 4 times. But you just walk out the door. And this is the thing. We've taken this gentle parenting and validating and affirmation. And later in this season or a series of episodes, I'm going to talk about what I think is the coming call of accountability for therapy, and what we've done to this thing called validation, where we validate everything. We validate everything. If that's how you feel, that's real. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if that's what that guy was trying to do, but it does. My guess is, based on looking at him, he's read a few parenting books. He's listened to a few parenting podcasts, and they've said you need to validate your children. No, you need to direct your children, and you can do that and validate them, I guess, but then just let it end. And now here's the thing. You might be asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with how we talk to ourselves? Well, I'm glad you asked, because one of the things we don't consider is the power of our words. We don't consider the power of our words and how we talk to ourselves. By and large, I feel like we do a good job in how we consider how our words impact other people. Now, there's some things that we're gonna have to talk about. We're gonna talk about, some things that we talk about where we say, well, words are this or words are that. We're gonna talk about that. What does that mean? We use phrases like, well, that makes me. But the words that you use to yourself, have you ever considered the results that you're getting in your life with the words that you use to yourself? That's what I want to talk about today. The parenting tidbit that I might do a whole episode on that. I don't know. I want to do a TikTok video on it. If you're not following me there, TikTok, I am Joe Martino. Also, you'll see shorts on YouTube. I am Joe Martino. We're like, hey, look, what you're doing, you're going on 10 minutes, bro. It isn't working. It's time to back out and try something different, which I would argue would be just silence. I think one of the things that parents do is they try to comfort their kids too much in inappropriate situations. And what I mean by that is we've gotten to this place where almost any discomfort that our children have, we want to take away. And so, dad, now look, I get it. I've been there with crying kids. There might have been some level of personal embarrassment for dad, but he was genuinely trying to comfort those kids. And that's not bad. It's just not effective. It isn't getting him what he wants. And this is one of the things I think we have to consider when we start considering how we talk to ourselves. What does it mean for us to consider the outcomes of our words? So a lot of people will talk to themselves and they will say things like, that's just the way I am. Or they will say, I am fill in diagnoses. And what happens is we tend to then start confusing things. And so instead of saying, I'm feeling angry, we say, I am angry. And our words start to create identity when I don't think that's what we mean. And this is how we end up with a lot of the outcomes that we're currently having. People are identifying as their diagnoses. People are saying, well, that's just the way I am, which is literally self-defeating. It's literally saying to themselves, this is as good as it gets. I will have to just manage this, whatever this is, for the rest of my life. And they're not talking to themselves in a way that they facilitate themselves to growth. And I really think this might be more important than anything else that we talk about when it comes to mental health. This is more important, I think, than medicine. I think this is more important than any intervention that we do, because how you talk to yourself sets how your brain starts to think, your habits of thinking, your pattern of thinking, and that pattern of thinking starts to create your self-identity. So we're going to go through both of these one-on-one, and then we're going to tie it back to dad at Costco. I feel a little bad using him, but nobody knows who he is, or at least she can't identify him from this episode. So we're going to just go with that. Okay, so that's just the way I am. Yeah, but the question is, and you've heard me say this before, is that who you want to be? Could you do something different? Could you do something different that would change who you are? Could you make a different choice? Right. And this, you'll hear all different iterations of this. I was talking to a therapist this week where one of his clients said to him, I can't help it. I just don't. I just compartmentalize my life and I just can't help it. That's hogwash. That's a choice. That it is not true that he just some magical alien riding on his back, making him compartmentalize his life. That's silliness. And so what happens is he now has a built-in excuse. When we use the phrase, that's just the way I am, we have a built-in excuse for what we're doing. And that dismissal, that excuse, creates a built-in excuse to shut down ownership. Because if that's just the way I am, then I don't have to do it. If that's just the way I am, I don't have to worry about it. If that's just the way I am, you can't be upset with me. You can't hold me accountable. And we're telling people this, that's just the way they are. Oh, you can't learn in this environment. Well, that's just the way it is. You can't learn. We tell students this all the time. My wife and I just had a fascinating conversation because one of the local schools put hammocks in, and she's like, that's a really good thing. I said, why is that a good thing? And she said, well, because not all kids can learn in a normal setting. And look, I'm not a fan of schools. We know this. We know I am not a fan of the 8 hours sitting in school all day, come home for 3 hours of homework. But where does that stop? That's my question. Because at some level, we all have to learn to be able to function inside of our normal or inside of societal expectations. And we have to be responsible for our own behaviors. We have to stop framing our traces as fixed traits, right? So if you have brown eyes, you have brown eyes. If you have blue eyes, you have blue eyes. Those are fixed traits. If you're short, you're short. Your eyes, you can put in contacts and change colors. Your height, you're not going to change much. Another problem with this is just the way I am, is it limits growth. It literally starts to limit your ability to grow. Because if that's just the way you are, why would you put in the effort to grow? Why would you put in the effort to be better? Why would you put in the effort to work towards not being that way? It's just the way you are, right? The third problem with it is it disempowers. And you know me, one of the reasons I hate the phrase, well, that makes me, is I hate the fact that it's a disempowering phrase. Because if I can make you mad, if something some person says or writes can make you mad, then your anger is controlled by them. You don't control it. And so when we say that's just the way I am, we create a problem for ourselves that creates a bad identity. And it works against us in being optimal versions of ourselves. Okay. And then if you flip that, and remember earlier I said there's two things we say to ourselves often that I think are troublesome. One is that's just the way I am. And then two is we tend to identify as our diagnoses or as our feelings. So rarely will you hear someone say, I feel angry. Most often you'll hear them say something along the lines of, I am angry. You will rarely hear someone say, I struggle with ADHD or I am diagnosed with ADHD. They'll say, oh man, I am ADHD. And when we start talking about I ams, when we start taking I ams, what we put on the end of that matters because it forms our identity. These two ways of talking to ourselves, these two sentences, that's just the way I am, and I am fill in emotion, they come together and they create our identity. Our self identity then drives everything that we do. And so it's really important that you talk to yourself in a way that is factual and credible and accurate, because how you talk to yourself will start to become how you view yourself. And one of the things that this dad kept saying to us, and I told you we're going to come back to it, was, I know it's frustrating. I want to highlight that because I'm glad he didn't say, I know you're frustrated. He did a really good job here. And since I feel like I owe him one, since I used him as my lead in the beginning, I feel like I owe him to say, hey, I think he did really good here. You're feeling frustrated because feelings are not permanent. There is a problem, and you'll meet these people. I did a consult just recently, and what that means is I talked to another counselor's client to give him some of my insight, right? So sometimes you'll do that for professional congruency and care and in helping each other. And I said, man, I'll tell you what, it's a young client, a 13-year-old client. I said, you can feel the anger radiating off of that person and off of the client. And a lot of it is the client used words where his identifying sentences were, I am angry, I am ADHD, I am this, I am that. And we catch this, I think we catch this because I'll hear people say, well, I always tell my kids not to say, I'm bad or I'm an idiot. I read a post one time by a woman who she was doing barn chores with her husband, and she dropped the bucket and she said, oh man, I'm such an idiot. And the husband actually said to her, nope, you're not an idiot. I need you to say, I'm not an idiot. I just dropped a bucket. In other words, you're not an idiot because you dropped the bucket, right? And when you start using words, I am, what comes next is important because the next step from that is you are. And one of the things that is happening in our society is we devalue life of those we disagree with. We devalue the people that we disagree with because you are an idiot. You are a moron. You are a fill in, pejorative term. And what happens is it starts with how we talk about ourselves. One of the things my wife says all the time that I so appreciate is you need to be able to give yourself grace if you want to give other people grace. Tell me what the world's, I always say, tell me what the world's doing to you, and I'll tell you what you're typically doing to the world, right? How you talk to yourself becomes how you talk to other people. And one of the problems that I feel like we're running into is we tend to think that we are what we feel. We tend to think that we are whatever it is we're struggling with. And I don't think that's accurate. So, what do we do about it? I feel like that is an excellent question, clearly. And I think the first thing we do is we need to bring to our awareness the words that we're using. We need to bring to our awareness the words that we use when we say I am. When we talk about ourselves, what are the words that we're using? We need to bring that to awareness and we need to target in on some phrases. So we need to target in on the phrase, that's just the way I am. We need to just bring that to our awareness, make it so it's something that we pursue of no, I'm not, that's not just the way I am, unless it's something that truly is a fixed trait like height or something like that. But we need to zoom in on those. We need to zero in on those. We need to target those intentionally so that what we're doing is we're talking about the reality that, hey, I feel this or I'm doing this, but I'm changing. And so we need to really be on the lookout for those things. And we need to separate out what we're feeling from who we are. So, and we can do this if you have kids. The easiest way for you to learn to do this is to target it with your children. Every time they're upset, you would say to them, I understand you're feeling upset. I understand you're feeling angry. I understand you're feeling discouraged. Whatever it is, instead of saying you are. Now, look, some of you are going to think I'm crazy here, but I'm telling you, an ancient writer once said that there is power of life and death in words. Literally, you speak part of the world around you into existence. This is a known phenomenon. How you talk to yourself matters. So we want to target the lies. We want to target the self-identifying statements that are not accurate. We want to target the self-identifying statements that lock us in to something that is temporary as though it's permanent. And then we want to replace that with truthful thinking, with truthful talking. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling angry. I'm very, very upset right now. Or I'm feeling very, very upset right now. Joe, you're being crazy. You're just being picky. I am a little bit because I think those words matter. Because what we're doing is creating a society that's run by its feelings. We're creating a society that is literally willing to do violence if it doesn't agree with what's being said because their feelings are hurt. That is not working, is walking out of work because their feelings were hurt, is doxing people, is shutting people down. Talk truthfully to yourself, and it's easier than to talk truthfully to other people, and it helps you see the humanity in other people. All right, I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for listening. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed this, would you be willing to share it with 3 of your friends? I can't tell you how much that would help me. And if you didn't like it, that's all right. Give me a negative review and then share it with your friends. I'd love that too. Let me know what you didn't like about it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.